Oh, okay, great. Like that.
That was actually 15 minutes, not 20 minutes.
Really?
The chairman used up the first 15.
Maybe we put that.
I think it must be short. I can shorten anything. Loved your wolves.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, can everyone hear me all right? Yes. Up the back, all good? All right, just wave if you can't hear me. So, as Charles said, if you want big, you get big. And there's few places on Earth that we're doing conservation on a scale as big as in Australia. So, Australia as a continent Australia as a continent functions much like an island when it comes to its biodiversity. So its geographic isolation for over 30 million years has led to the evolution of some of the world's most unique species. We've got 80% of plants and mammals and 90% of reptiles and frogs that are found literally nowhere else in the world. So this island effect not only has shaped Australia's ecosystems and species, but also the conservation challenges that we face today. So I come from Hobart in Tasmania, and like many Tasmanians, I grew up very proud of our natural wildlife and really believed that what we saw in our national park was true wilderness. When I joined AWC, I had the privilege of visiting the sanctuary I'm going to talk to you about today, Mt Gibson in Western Australia. And this is one of these fenced safe havens, and that operates much like an isolated island within the broader landscape of threats. When I first set foot in this fenced safe haven, it was literally like the volume dial had just been turned up. The bush was absolutely buzzing with life. There were bilby diggings and bandicoot tracks and insects everywhere, and it was just absolutely thriving. So that's when it really hit me that something's deeply flawed here. What many of us consider wilderness in Australia to be, even in places as stunning as Tasmania and our national parks, is often little more than a marsupial ghost town. And we have accepted this shifting baseline of what we think our natural world is meant to look like. So today, I'll tell you about how our organisation, Australian Wildlife Conservancy, is starting to do something about this. But before I do that, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country on which AWC works and all traditional owners throughout Australia. While we are far from Australia today, I really do hope to highlight how their enduring connection to land, wildlife, waters, country and culture inspires a lot of the conservation practices that we'll discuss in this presentation. So my name's Lizzy Crotty. As mentioned, I come from Tasmania. I studied an environmental science degree at the University of Queensland, and I started my career in the field working as a seabird scientist. Not with puffins, unfortunately. Would be a dream, though. I then shifted my focus to the more human side of conservation through projects in Zambia and South Africa. For the past 6 years, I've been in London leading development for Australian Wildlife Conservancy UK. In 10 days, I am heading off on a Women in STEM leadership expedition to Antarctica. So, quite a busy month. So, that really has taught me that conservation doesn't happen in isolation. It takes science, it takes people, and it takes bold action. So now you've met one Tasmanian icon, I will introduce you to another. So this is the thylacine, or the Tasmanian tiger, and you might recognise it for all the wrong reasons. So in 1936, the last known thylacine died in captivity in Hobart Zoo after being hunted to extinction by humans. So the thylacine here is just one of the remarkable and bizarre species that have evolved in Australia. Australia is home to nearly 10% of the world's biodiversity, and as I mentioned, this rich diversity is really attributed to the long geographic isolation. But like any island, Australia's biodiversity is incredibly vulnerable. So severe degradation of Australia's natural world began about 250 years ago when European colonisation brought all the great stuff, introduced predators, cats and foxes, habitat loss, invasive species, and it's just all caused these catastrophic declines since 1788. So Australia tragically leads the world in mammal extinctions with 40 species and 6 subspecies lost. So we know why this is happening. We've built up a really deep understanding of the drivers of biodiversity loss, and climate change is compounding the impacts of existing threats as well as introducing new stresses. So unless these threats are managed effectively, we're just going to keep seeing more extinctions. So that's where AWC comes in. So Australian Wildlife Conservancy was established in 1991 by a British conservationist called Martin Copley. And 34 years later, we now directly manage or work in partnership across an area the size of England, which is about 32 million acres, or 2% of Australia's landmass. And I know those numbers are big, so just to try to conceptualise the vastness, that's the UK. So we've got a dedicated team of ecologists, field scientists, land managers based all at these sites, mostly at these sites, doing practical on-ground land management. So if you just think about actually logistically delivering conservation across this area is, not for the faint-hearted. So we are a charity, and we're funded predominantly by private donations through Australia, the UK and the US. So it's a straightforward approach. We establish wildlife sanctuaries around Australia, either directly purchasing them ourselves or working in partnerships. We implement that practical land management. We prevent extinctions by delivering Australia's most extensive rewilding program. And everything we do is informed by world-class science. So I'm going to highlight some of the threats I mentioned that wildlife is facing and what AWC is doing about it. So first of all, I'm just going to touch on fire because it's a really important way of how we manage our sanctuary sites. Nothing can happen unless you've got good fire management. So across most of Australia, long established, hopefully that's not a fire over there, long established custodianship of country by Indigenous Australians, including the management of fire, has been disrupted. So it's just really important to keep in mind that while a lot of rewilding we sort of conceptualise as being just let nature heal and just let it do its thing, Australia's in a very different situation. We've had an actively managed landscape for the past over 60,000 years from Indigenous Australians. So the dispossession of Indigenous people and the loss of that management has now destabilised that equilibrium. So generally speaking, it's a bit different for different areas of Australia, but good fire management is characterised by a regular schedule of cooler, patchy burns early in the dry season. So the real goal is to create a mosaic of burnt and unburnt vegetation. So this ensures that there's sufficient habitat and shelter and food for native wildlife, as opposed to all the images you see on TV about those terrible wildfires in the news where everything turns into a moonscape. So across our sanctuaries and partnership areas, by implementing this fire management plan, we've reduced the extent of these late season wildfires by over 50%, which is really great news for wildlife. Feral animal control is a very, very big part of what we do. And feral herbivores, particularly cattle, buffalo, pigs, sheep, goats, anything really that arrived here with colonisation, is doing a terrible job of is really, really badly degrading our landscapes, particularly around sensitive ecosystems like waterways. So here's some damage done to a lake in the central Kimberley, where we had feral cattle and feral pigs coming in, just absolutely decimating the waterway there. Nothing could grow back. So we built a fence around them and excluded the feral herbivores. And you can now see the difference in just 4 years of getting rid of what's not meant to be there. So by managing fire and managing feral herbivores, we're able to then lessen the impact of the greatest threat to Australian wildlife, which is the feral cat. So they kill more than 2 billion animals every year, which is just an astronomical number. So we've done a lot of research into how fire management helps to reduce their hunting success. So we do obviously that across all of our sanctuaries. We also know that baiting, trapping, shooting also helps to reduce numbers and start to alleviate some of the pressure on native mammals, but it'll never fully eradicate cats completely. We're just working, Australia's just too vast of an area. So elsewhere, we're establishing this network of large fenced cat-free areas. We're restoring locally extinct species into these fenced areas where feral predators can't get them. And some of our wildlife is so vulnerable to cats and foxes that they only survive in these fenced areas completely free of cat and foxes. So they're pretty impressive. They're 6 feet tall, made of a special wire mesh with a skirt at the bottom and a floppy top, so cats can't jump up and over. And they're also electric. So they're really expensive. There's a bit like Jurassic Park. So expensive to build and very, very hard to, time-consuming to maintain. But these fences are the best solution to stop extinctions. And in case you're not convinced, here we've got a little bilby. And I don't know if you can see it, but here we've got a feral cat on the other side of the fence. So you can just see, yeah, we've kind of ruined his dinner there. And here we go, we've got probably what I can describe as a very frustrated fox trying to get into the fenced area and just devour all the delicious native species you can smell. It's like waiting outside of a buffet or something. Let me in! So we're managing a huge amount of this cat and fox-free area and rewilding with these species these mammals that have gone extinct from the regions. So once we've established the fence, we undertake intensive feral animal eradication and monitoring, and once it's declared feral-free, we're able to then reintroduce those species. So we're really focused on longevity here, building genetically viable and healthy populations of some of our most critically endangered mammals that would just disappear otherwise. Here's just an illustration to show you how comprehensive our rewilding program is across the country. So you can see all of the sites where we've got these fence-safe havens, and along the side there are all the species that we've reintroduced. And then the coloured dots indicates, oh, have I got that right? Yes, so we're doing multiple reintroductions of species to different sites, and that's to make sure that we're not just throwing them in a fence, closing the gate and saying, all right, good luck to you. They're very carefully monitored to make sure that genetic diversity is very strong. So now I'm going to introduce you to Mt Gibson, which is this fenced area just here. So I'm going to take you about 200 miles northwest of Perth. It's about 3,000 acres in the Avon Wheatbelt on the traditional lands of the Badimia people. So this area has these remnant Western Australian woodlands that have been identified as nationally significant for conservation because there's so few of it left. So Mt Gibson, before we acquired it, was a cattle station, but fortunately it was never really heavily stocked. So the integrity of the soil and vegetation actually remained quite well intact. So this is an absolutely beautiful part of the country. Mt Gibson supports an incredibly high diversity of wildlife, including a lot of different bird species like malleefowl, fowl, pink cockatoos and the peregrine falcon. There's over 600 plant species that have been confirmed on the sanctuary, but the number increases with pretty much every survey we do. So it's estimated to be more like 700 to 800 species present. However, as with much of inland Australia, the region in which Mt Gibson is located has lost a very high proportion of European mammal assemblage. So around half the mammals that once occurred in the Wheatbelt and the adjacent areas have disappeared as a result of introduced predators, feral herbivores, and loss of habitat. So Mt Gibson was purchased and with the intention of a site that could play a really important role in starting to reverse some of these losses. So in 2014, AWC established a 19,000 acre feral predator-free area in which wild, self-sustaining populations of mammals could start to be reintroduced. So it's a huge job, as you can imagine, building a fence this size and then getting rid of everything that's not meant to be there. So we did extensive cat and fox control, both within the fence and continue to do it outside of the fence. And this consists mainly of trapping, shooting and baiting, and it took around 18 months. So the fence's construction was completed in June 2014, and the final cat was captured in May 2015, and then our very first species, the woylie, was reintroduced by the end of that year in 2015. Numbers have skyrocketed for many species since their release within the fence. So between 2015 and 16, 56 of this animal here, a bilby, were released at Mt Gibson, and now their population is about 1,500 individuals. So they're absolutely thriving in there. And there's no shortage of very cute pictures I get from ecologists with little baby bilbies in the pouch and at the heel. So along with safeguarding these species from extinction, the return of each of these digging mammals is contributing to the long-term health and resilience of the ecosystem. So mammals such as the woylie here and the bilby are recognised as ecosystem engineers. They're playing a really, really critical role in things like seed dispersal and water filtration, purely just by all of their digging. So it's now been 10 years since the construction of this fenced area, and AWC has introduced 10 of Australia's most at-risk mammals to Mt Gibson. So for many of these species, it was really significant to get them back on country, because two of them, the Shark Bay mouse here, oh sorry, not that one, the Shark Bay bandicoot and the banded hair wallaby, were both completely extinct on mainland Australia. They only occurred on offshore islands. So to bring them back to the mainland in this fenced area was really significant. Also the Chuditch here, or the western quoll, as well as the brush-tailed possum, haven't been seen in this Wheatbelt area for over a century. So the return of each of these species to the landscape holds really profound cultural significance for the Badimia people who have been engaged with this project throughout, and they're really thrilled to have these animals back on country. It's always a very emotional homecoming, welcoming them back. So our network of fenced areas does offer the best hope to reverse this decline of Australia's wildlife, but we understand we cannot fence all of Australia, so we've always looked to that future beyond the fence. So outside of the fenced area on Mt Gibson Sanctuary, we undertake extensive measures to reduce the density of foxes and cats through large-scale aerial baiting, ahead of some proposed outside of the fence reintroductions. And while most mammals on Sanctuary have been reintroduced within the safe haven, two of our more robust species, including the brush-tailed possum, have been released outside of the fence now. So in 2021 and 22, we had around 50 individuals inside the fence that were released, 50 outside of the fence, and now we've been very closely managing them and very happy to report that they have since established, and there is evidence of breeding and finding very, very nice hollows, as you can see here. Nearly didn't fit in there. In 2023, the Chuditch became the 10th species to be translocated to Mt Gibson outside of the fence as well, in conjunction with this intensive feral cat and fox control. So we've now got 45 Chuditch that were released, and we've got high survival rates and also evidence of breeding of them as well. I'm just going to flick through that because I know I'm just about out of the time, but using technology to help us cover such vast areas such as drone has been very, very helpful to us. So the results of our Mt Gibson program really provide a lot of hope for the future. So while fenced safe havens are essential for the survival of many of our vulnerable mammals, AWC's long-term goal is to restore species at a landscape scale throughout Australia. So over the next couple of years, with this continued intensive eradication of feral cats and foxes, we're hoping to establish a population of woylies outside of the fence. And this is going to be really interesting because there's going to be a whole bunch of research we can do into the tolerance that our little native mammals like a woylie can really have of feral predators. So visiting Mt Gibson as my first ever experience with a fenced safe haven really opened my eyes as to what the rest of Australia is missing and what we accept as this new norm of depleted nature. So I hope that you come away from this session and away from this conference feeling inspired, knowing that so much is being done to start to reverse these declines. Thank you very much.
Lizzy, Charles, thank you so much for two very different, but also with, I think, some really interesting commonalities in them, both fascinating presentations about parts of the world that I think many of us don't know very much about and that we've learned a lot from. So we've just got a few minutes for questions, and I'm going to take two, but I first of all just want to acknowledge what's actually come out interestingly as the top question, which is there a reason why the great majority of speakers in this conference are men? It's curious to see that even within the environmental space, few initiatives are taken to address the gender gap. Now, I'm not going to respond to that in relation to the conference, so I will just note that Lizzy's just beautifully bucked that trend for us, if it is a trend. But I do want to note that I think it does raise questions which happen in many, many sectors, including our own, of equity, diversity, inclusion. And it's something we constantly need to be vigilant about. And I'm sure we're all very much aware of that. But it leads me into certainly one of the questions that's also come out near the top, and I'd like to ask this one. This is a question for Lizzy, and several people asked, has your organisation, can you tell us more about how your organisation works practically with the knowledge of First Nations people, Indigenous people in the landscapes where you're working? And I think we all appreciated your formal acknowledgement of country and culture at the beginning. But perhaps just a little bit more about practical involvement in things like fire management, where obviously there are long traditions and practical knowledge of how to do these things. So can you tell us just a little bit more?
Sure. It's a very good question. And really it varies from different areas in Australia where we work, because some, unfortunately, there's a lot of areas of Australia where the knowledge has been lost due to all sorts of terrible things that happen through history. So when we've got a really, I suppose, there's a very strong presence of an Indigenous community in an area. So I'll use the Kimberley as an example there. The Dambimangari people, we essentially work in partnership with them to deliver fire management. So that's in the form of taking centuries, millennia of knowledge and then actually combining that with modern day technology such as implementing it from a helicopter rather than actually going along the ground with fire sticks as they would have previously. So yes, it's really combining the two, and it's a
That's a great example. there are some other really interesting questions about the Australia case, but I think you'll have to pick them up over coffee. In particular, people are asking about what mega predators existed previously, and to what extent have feral cats and foxes replaced those roles. But people who ask that, catch Lizzy over coffee, because I always want to take one more question. So a number of people, and this is really addressed to Charles, have asked, has it been smoother working with a Labour government compared to the previous government? Now, that's a very UK-focused question, but I wonder if you could just expand on it slightly more broadly. I mean, you really made a strong point about the importance of legal frameworks, of regulation, of governments, of the state, really crucial. And I wonder if you could just reflect on whether the particular political parties in power, how much difference does that make? And how do we square short-term governments with the long-term nature of restoration and rewilding in marine landscapes and actually in landscapes more generally?
Well, good question. I have met all the Labour environment ministers now, and I actually rather like all of them. And that was not a case with the previous government. Really wasn't, particularly recently. But I have to say that it's a slightly appalling thing to have to say, but you know, they got in, they said all these nice things about nature, Steve Reed particularly, who said some very good things about nature, and they have done nothing. We gave them notice that the figures on what their achievements were in kicking trawling out of marine protected areas was at the end of the year, and it's about 75% of English MPAs inshore are trawled, and there was a previous government target to do something about that, and we gave Steve Reed 2 weeks' notice and to declare what that policy was. What did they have a policy? Were they going to implement the policy of the previous government? Was that their policy? Or do nothing? Or can they have a better policy? Nothing. And you know, I do feel that I don't know what it is. Is it the civil service has sat on them? But these very normal, very decent people in these jobs are not being allowed to do their job, the ministers.
Okay. Interesting response. Well, I'm sure there are, again, people here that you can pick that up with afterwards, but I think maybe there is a broader point about the long-term, large-scale nature of rewilding has to extend beyond both national borders and indeed the contingencies of particular political regimes. It's, in a sense, a bigger game in town, and what kind of regulation can help get us there, along with those social movements of people from below. So anyway, thank you for a tremendously interesting session. Let's have a clap to everybody, and then I'm handing...